patience and living in the now. And now we have the data and the physiological responses to understand how and why this happens. It's astonishing to me how much we miss in the present, myself included, because we're fixated on some other version of ourselves. If you live with a foot in tomorrow and a foot in yesterday, you shit all over today. So that's it. It's patience. It's living in the now. Most of the stuff we think about is never even going to come to fruition.
All right, what's up, everybody? Welcome to the show. Welcome to What You Don't Hear. It's time to get to know somebody a whole lot better because this is a life podcast. It's an open journal dive into people's lives as I sit and I uncover the real story behind my guest journey, finding out what makes them who they are, talking about all the ups, all the downs, and all the thoughts and feelings in between as we dig into the parts of their story that, well, we otherwise wouldn't get to hear about. I am your host. My name is Ross Tyson. I'm a creative of many kinds, a maker of many things. And here is a reminder right here, right now, up front, to make sure that you are subscribed to this show on whatever platform that you're checking this out on, whether it's Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or my YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/Ross Tyson. Find that like and follow button, hit it if you would be so kind. And if you really like the show and you want to make sure that you don't miss any of it in any place, follow it around social at WYDH Pod. I get it. I'm just one of a million creators asking these exact same things of you over and over. But we got to because, these things, they really do help more than you may think. The support goes a very long way in helping me continue to make all of these creative endeavors that I do happen. And speaking of support, I am lucky enough to have some supporters and sponsors of this show, and I'm going to tell you about them right now. Then on the other side of that, we dig into this week's episode. So this episode is sponsored by Promo West Productions. We are wrapping out another year with an amazing sponsorship and partnership with Promo West here in Columbus, Ohio. And if you live here or around Columbus, Ohio, and you're interested in catching a live concert, going and getting that live music experience, even though right now at the time of recording, it is a bit cold outside, well, you're going to have your opportunities, and you may want to check out one of these upcoming concerts coming your way via Promo West Productions. They've got Lauren Mayberry at Newport Music Hall on February 9th. Bad Fish, a tribute to Sublime, is at Newport Music Hall on February 12th. Then Father John Misty comes to Kemba Live on February 17th. And then on February 28th, which happens to be the host of this podcast's birthday, I might add, Promo West has Dropkick Murphys coming to Kemba Live as well. So if you want to grab tickets to any of those shows, all you got to do is jump to AXS.com, or as always, for more information on these or any other upcoming concerts, if you want to know who's coming to town and when, well, you can find all the info that you need over at promowestlive.com, or simply follow them at Promo West Live. Okay, so this week I sat down for another virtual conversation here, and a conversation with my friend, video creator, and all-around just cool guy, Robert Teegarden, for a really solid talk regarding the freelance world, navigating, working for yourself, finding clients, selling yourself, keeping yourself motivated to do all the things and pursue all the dreams, and really just a long list of a lot of great stuff. I will tell you at the beginning here, if you want a bunch of tips, tricks, ideas, or advice that align with a lot of what that list, those subjects that I just named and listed off, just go follow Robert on social right now, because amongst a lot of his work that he is often sharing, he is also definitely tossing out a lot of cool tips and tricks within the video industry pretty often. But of course, you're going to get a lot of that right here, right now, as well from him directly in this episode. So quick backstory. Robert and I met about a year and a half ago, or maybe, 2 years, I don't know at this point. But we were working on a project together. And essentially lived together for a week for this project, this out-of-state project. And man, we instantly clicked. He is so easy to talk to, so fun to talk to. He loves taking those deep dive conversations into pretty much anything, which is, of course, right up my alley and, of course, right in line with this podcast. But he's really just an open book of just thoughts and knowledge and just loves just to kind of dig into anything conversation wise. So I knew I needed to get him on the show at some point ever since that moment. And of course, that time is now. And I gotta say, while this one is a very fun conversation, I feel like we only kind of scratched the surface of what we really could have dug into, and probably the abundance of stories and thoughts and opinions and advice that he really could have dug into. So who knows, maybe there's a part 2 with Robert at some point. But hey, we haven't even gotten to part 1 yet, and it is an absolute joy of a conversation. So yes, there's a lot of video talk, but if you're a creative of any kind, this one will connect well with you, I promise. So let's dive in. Let's get to it. This is episode 127. It's right now. It's my guest, Robert Teegarden.
I'm going to brief disclaimer for you and everyone that's watching. My camera's here, but you're here. So if we spend any particular time looking at the big Italian schnoz I got going on this side, I'm apologizing in advance. It's not my most flattering angle, but I can't figure out.
Totally understandable. Honestly, you have the vibe behind you. I'm in a brand new home office that I have yet to fully decorate. So I feel like it doesn't matter. Doesn't matter where you're looking, because I look like I'm in a very sterile, just like office room right now. There's like no decor anywhere. It's funny because the corner that my desk is in, back here where no one can see is where I've decorated so far.
It looked perfect, right?
that's where. So like with my view, I'm like, I got shelves with plants on them and pictures and put all this sort of stuff behind me. And I thought about that leading into this today. I was like, man, I'm not going to have a very aesthetically pleasing background for this podcast. But you know what? No one's really caring, but you have really, really outdone me in this one. So
dude, I appreciate it. It's been several years in the making, so I'll give you a pass for a new office. You're doing just fine.
Home office, because I recently moved this summer, so like I'm kind of building my first home office, because like before in my apartment, it was just my apartment, right? Everything was just what I wanted, whatever. But now, it's officially like, oh, this is a specific room in the house that is your office. And it's kind of this like really fun undertaking to kind of dig in and like, okay, what's the new aesthetic of an office that I want, right? I've been trading some things out, buying some new stuff. And I'm like, all right, like I'm kind of almost taking it slow, even though I'm excited.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? But I'm excited to catch up with you and get some sort of vibe like that looking.
Hopefully I can pass the energy on through the line.
Yes, please. But dude, I am very, very stoked that we are making this happen. I'm so stoked that we've officially aligned schedules. Things are working. We're here. We got mics. We got cameras. Man, we haven't chatted outside of Instagram DMs for a while, minute. Right? I mean, we were basically when we met. Yeah. We were on that shoot a couple years ago.
Totally.
Got to hang out for like 4 or 5 days straight. And I would say became pretty good friends within that 4 or 5 days. We fell
deep into the hole real fast, dude. It was, I just like real recognize real thing all the time.
I honestly just want to dive straight in, because as much as for those handful of days and via the internet, we have built a solid friendship, I don't feel like we've ever just taken the full dive on just you and all that I like. Obviously, I know all that you do.
Sure.
But really like where it starts and all the sort of stuff that, of course, the show is made of.
Yeah.
So for maybe at the beginning, for the unanointed or the unaware, lay it out for me. Like, how do you describe everything that you do?
This is a great, complicated question that I've tried for 40 plus years to distill down to a sentence. I'm not there yet, but I'm trying to get better at it. I think I liken myself to all things creative. I've been really fortunate to figure out a way of making my passions and hobbies the way that I make a living and put food on the table for myself and my family. So I grew up in a really creative household. My dad and my mom were both from very musical backgrounds. The super long story short, where Pops is concerned, is that he was set to be the opening act for Oingo Boingo in the early 80s. He had the same manager. Apparently, I'm going to probably butcher some of this, as like Van Halen. They were doing the same circuit on Sunset, all that fun stuff. They're ready to go on the road. And he was like, something doesn't feel right. And 9 months later, this dream killer showed up and kind of messed the whole thing for everyone. And my mom's side of the family is super musical as well. My Italian godfather, who's my mom's oldest brother, is basically like the real life carbon copy of Mr. Holland from Mr. Holland's Opus. And so from the time I was really young, I was kind of the sixth member of their family, and I would go to the LA Phil with them all the time. They had season tickets. when it came time for me to kind of play instruments and those sorts of things. Like every other week he would show up with the trumpet and with the saxophone, with the French horn, and just like, I want to play this, I want to play this, I want to play. And that just kind of became like my little world, you know? And so music and creativity was the thing. My dad was a contractor, so we were always making stuff all the time. And then that went through all the way through, you know, elementary, middle school, high school. I was always playing in bands and singing and doing a whole mess of stuff throughout that time too. Got the privilege of traveling a ton where that was concerned, starting in high school. Went to college at Cal State University, Northridge. They have a really well-renowned, I think it's like top 25 in the country music business program. So went there with the declared voice major, but played in a whole bunch of death metal bands the entire time because I was playing bass and singing at the same time. And at the time I went, I had my projects and my bands and the stuff that I was doing. And I've been really blessed to be able to record in all these major rooms. I was at Prince's place for a week straight doing an album. We did NRG, we did the Geffen Room, we did all these sorts of things. Did all these little like mini tours across the country and into Europe and those sorts of things. And then at some point I knew that like avant-garde death metal wasn't really going to pay the bills or like provide a life that I would want. My now wife, then girlfriend, and I were together at the time. And I was like, I like the idea of being home for dinner and trying to figure that stuff out. So I had, because of my educational background, I had this understanding of what intellectual property law looked like. And so licensing and publishing became a thing that I was like, we could really stop releasing music tomorrow. And not we, like people in general. And I would still have a job in that field for, you know, well over a decade. So I leaned into that space and started licensing this new thing called digital video and this brand new company called YouTube. We kind of trying to figure out what that looked like and how you would pay it. And the people that were, interested in early adopter enough to be like, yeah, let's put our stuff on the internet. And I kind of built this weird career licensing these interesting new digital product types. Got bored with that, went back to school kind of midway through, got my master's in the same subject because I wanted to teach at a collegiate level at some point. And it, you know, when you go back to school, you kind of go from like this standpoint to this standpoint, right? Like you go in with this like tiny objective and all of a sudden it just blows the doors off of what you think is possible. And it's like, my grandmother used to say, what's in the blood comes out, right? And so now all these like little entrepreneurial ideas started popping up, you know, and my dad owns his own business and his dad did, and a bunch of my uncles and the same thing. So it's like I kind of felt like I had this ability to run my own show, so to speak. Mm-hmm. Wife and I got married, finished school. 2 months later, my first son was born, who's now 10. A couple months later, we got pregnant again. It's crazy, but I have boys that are 14 months apart. And when they were 18 months and 4 months old, I figured out a golden parachute out of the Universal Music Group system. I left with no real plan and somehow ended up Casey Neistatting and picking up a Canon T5i or whatever the hell that thing was. And I made 200 movies in 200 days. I was editing a bunch in that like 20-year time period of making music and going through studios and all that type of stuff. Like I had just really maxed out a whole bunch of iBook G4s and we broke them, the smoke coming out of the side, just trying to figure out how to edit on Final Cut 4, and then it became 7, and then it's all. So I was always moving in NLEs, and then I also had Pro Tool and Logic experience. I was in and out of studios. I ran like 2 small ones for a long time as well. So the editing world made a lot of sense to me. I got to find this article. I think you'd love it. There was this producer was talking about his top 5 favorite editing archetypes. And the top one on the list was musicians turn video editors. And I laughed. And he goes, they have an unfair advantage. They already understand timing. They already know how to build tension and resolve. And they already have, like, it's just this cadence that you kind of build through music that tends to be this very kind of lyrical way of telling story in moving picture. And I always felt like that was kind of like my unfair advantage, is like this music guy coming into the film world. And so just kept making movies about my family and just different shit, and would just post them because I needed like a daily creative outlet, because at the time I wasn't really playing much music. And that slowly became all of my like super rad, way cooler than I am producer, director friends are like, hey, like I just randomly found this thing on YouTube. Like, is this you? I'm like, yeah. It's like, hey, like these 5 seconds are amazing. And I think for like a lot of people, they'd be like, 5 seconds, what? Like that's a 12-minute video. Like how can 5 seconds be great? That was, you literally could have paid me $1 million and I would have thought that compliment was more valuable at the time, because it just showed like I had this like weird wind in my sails of an ability to like change into this new medium and new paradigm. And I remember sitting on the couch with Juliana one night and I looked at her and I was like, I think if I had like the lane, I could really make this thing work, because it felt so familiar to when I was in my early 20s, interning in studios and record labels and all this different stuff when I was in school. Like I kind of knew how to make that make sense and how to be of value in that world, you know? And so I got asked to come on set a couple times, pro bono, like just hold this C-stand so it doesn't fall over. And then, you know, carry some sandbags. And then I can't pay you this time, but like maybe I got some extra gear that I can give you if you want to. And then I remember doing my first shoot where I could trade an edit for some lights. And I was just super stoked. And then that just kind of like kept snowballing to the point where I just kept making content and kind of came up with this idea, export every day, which has been my hashtag on Instagram for a really long time, which is just going through the reps of getting better. And the reps don't always have to be an edit. They don't always have to be shooting. They can be the business side of things. They can be the soft skills. They can do all that. But like, it's just daily deposits for me of progressing forward. The start of me leaving my job was 2016. So I'm, 8-9 years into doing this thing. And it's a beautiful thing, man. I mean, I like I said, I get to do this thing that I was already doing for free because I just loved the creative process of like having nothing, this blank slab of clay, and just fucking around for a couple of days and having a thing to give to the world, And there's a ton of, I know you and I can go real deep on this type of subject, but there's along that 10, 12-year process, there's just been like an unbelievable amount of self-discovery. And I put a ton of time and effort into figuring out what makes me happy and content and fulfilled. And that's kind of like, that's it. Even in music, when it was like 75% of the skeleton was done and we got to start to put the hand claps on and the tambourine came in, like, the production elements, I was like, I can't get more happy than this, Yeah. And so film has kind of been that same deal for me too. It's like the planning process becomes kind of arduous and then blah, blah, blah. But we're on set and we're like, we can see the thing take shape. And that's when you just kind of, lose track of time, fall into that flow state. And it's like, this is the best that life can get at this point. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's that creative process. So yeah, man, that's like the hyper condensed version of it. But yeah, that's it. That's how I do it.
I feel like I have about 100 questions throughout that entire timeline that I'm going to try to remember to dig back into. Cause I'm sure we uncovered some of this that, the time we met and got to hang out and spend a few days together, but I don't think I remembered half of that to be completely honest with you. Like I didn't remember that your kind of creative start was in the music industry.
Yeah. Big time.
Did not remember. And how many years was that? So
I put in, it's about 15 tip to root between like the interning portion and then working for labels. I was a fifth year senior in my undergraduate. Music programs are wild in that way where you take I took 18 units a semester, winter session, 2 summer sessions, and still had 5 years to graduate. Cause you just take so many fucking classes, dude. It's wild.
Yeah.
And, but I was interning at least at one, mostly 2 places at a time. And then I literally left the doors of Universal Music the day before my 10-year anniversary. And I graduated my undergraduate. I started Universal on a Monday, graduated on Tuesday, and went right back to work on Wednesday and didn't stop for that 10 years.
And just to clarify, like when you end up working for Universal and you're doing like what specifically are you doing during all this time? Is it audio engineering?
No, so it's all. So I worked. It's weird, like paradigm and how it works, but Universal owns and controls a bunch of different subsidiary labels, right? So UMG as a corporate entity works with Island Def Jam and Geffen and Interscope and A&M and Capitol Records. Like they own all of that stuff. So we worked on the corporate side and we served all the different labels and we would license the songs that we would create master recordings with, right? Okay. So if you would record, we did a cover version of New York, New York, we would have to go back to Sony ATV and get the rights to the fact that we made that recording and we're going to distribute that recording.
Gotcha.
So, yeah.
Okay, so while you're sitting and you're working with Universal Music Group,
yeah,
in your mind at that point in time, are you like, heck yeah, music was my first and number one passion,
totally.
or I guess that now that I've dove into,
yeah,
I made it, I'm good, this is going to be the rest of my life, maybe I'll do some things on the side, but no, I'm good here. Like, was that like the thing?
For the most part, like, you know, because you hear this stuff, especially in that, this is like the early 2000s. And so this kind of interesting narrative around bachelor's degrees and people like getting, you know, you get a liberal arts degree, but you end up doing something completely different in like than the field that you studied in, which I think is like an overwhelmingly common situation to have. You know, for a long time, it was like, dude, I hit the lotto. Like not only was it like culturally, it was such a huge fit too, because I was doing the thing that I wanted to do, working in the industry that I wanted to work in. And then I was working with a bunch of people, especially like executive behavior that understood what it meant to have a bunch of creatives working in this corporate structure. So it's like, hey, we're going on tour for a week, and we would dip out and like people would be like, yeah, no problem. Like, see you when you get back. Like I got the Wells Cargo in the back. You want to borrow it? Like we were working in that environment. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And inevitably there was kind of a funny situation, but like a bunch of my network and one of my other buddies who actually, he pulled me in, and then we ended up pulling in like 60 some odd people in the department that stemmed from us. So it's like, you know, you're going to work with my guitar player for 10 years, worked side by side with me. The guy that literally still lives behind me in the house here, like we shared an office wall, and now we share like a wall in our backyard. So it was cool. Like it was there for a long time. And admittedly, when I started to feel a lot of like feelings of like, dude, this just isn't my bag anymore, and I don't want to be the next like level of these people, which invariably happened. Hence the reason why I'm doing what I'm doing today. The thing that I like lamented the most was A, the people, and then B, I felt like such an asshole for looking at this like perfectly cush situation in terms of like checking all of the boxes and being like, nah, like it's not good enough. You know what I mean? Right. So it was an interesting shift, and something that was, that I had to wrestle with a little bit and give myself permission to be like, yeah, like but it's okay that it doesn't make you totally content and happy. You know what I mean?
Can we talk for a second about that decision-making process? Because I feel like that is huge for a lot of us, of like, you have a thing that is ultimately maybe perfectly fine. Yeah, there's some stuff that we want to change. We're figuring out, hey, we have some new interests that we do want to venture into, but it's really, really hard. It's taking that leap, right?
Yeah.
That's the scary part.
Totally.
But you also have to talk yourself not only through taking that leap, but also that it's okay to take a chance. Because I feel like at some point, whether we have a job that we like or a job that we dislike and we hate, at some point we can kind of fall into a routine that whether we like it or not, it feels safe, it's comfortable, it's what we know, it's what we understand, it's the routine that we've fallen into.
Yeah.
So talking yourself into taking that leap is usually a pretty difficult process, because you're like, how could I want something different? You know, even if I don't like this thing over here, it's still providing me what I need.
Right.
And allowing yourself to pursue something you want over what you may need is a pretty difficult process. Like, what was that like for you, or what do you remember from that process?
It's so right off the rip, I want to say three different things. I'm acknowledging, not in like some woke sense, but I'm really acknowledging like what was overwhelming to me was where I was privileged to be born. Because I went to sleep April 29th as a copyright manager, licensing, royalty accountant. And I woke up May 1st as an entrepreneur. And it would just like, it happened. And that there's a lot of places in the world where that is not a privilege that we get to have. You know what I mean?
Right.
And then, you know, you touched on something that I think is really interesting, which is this kind of wrestling between like, I'm still doing this thing. And yeah, it's like all of the stuff that I wanted it to be, you know, but I'm still like not necessarily content. Like, you eat enough lobster, it's going to taste like soap at some point. Like, hedonic bias is really a thing that gets to people. No matter how cush your situation is, you can always find the fly shit in the pepper if you're looking hard enough. You know what I mean? And then the third thing off the rip is, and this is, I mean, I'm very grateful that I can kind of live in this place. My wife and I have been together almost 21 years, you know, between the split of like dating and being married. And still to this day, recent past excluded that you and I talked about prior to this episode. I'm just overwhelmingly grateful for the type of partner I have, because I didn't know my asshole from my ear hole. And still in this context of video, there's the thing that keeps me so engaged is that there's so much to learn, and by no means would I clarify myself as an expert, but I had no idea what I was doing. And I just looked at her with these big eyelashes and kind of batted my eyes. And I was like, I think I could figure this out and put food on the table. And she's like, go for it, buddy. The trust that she had in me and my ability to go out there and not fumble the ball too hard. If I didn't have that, there's no way that I'd be able to be telling this type of a story. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but look, a lot of it kind of dovetailing off of that same statement, a lot of it was Juliana's recognition of how unhappy I was doing the thing that I was doing. And just it was a slow grade before I realized oh dude, I don't want to do this at all. I couldn't. And there were a bunch of things in terms of promises not kept and, promotions and moving and those sorts of things that kind of played into it. Very typical corporate structure when you're trying to climb a ladder. I was also admittedly a perfect Costanza moment where it's not them, it's me, because I was trying to kind of shift a very static culture and come in with these big MBA ideas and be we should do it all this way. And they're like, dude, we're fine. Half of these people are just punching the time clock. They don't want to ruffle the feathers, so to speak. And I was just well, fuck, what am I supposed to do? Right.
Yep.
But, look, it was getting up in the morning a little bit later and, kind of shuffling myself into the office a little bit later, taking a little bit longer, gym break at lunchtime. And, it's 5. I'll finish that later on, and just kind of begrudgingly doing stuff because it's I'm just not engaged, Yeah. I don't have the passion for doing this type of work like I once did. And I think, like I said, my graduate and postgraduate work focused so much on self-discovery and kind of figuring out exactly who I am and what made me tick. And so there was a lot of work inside the graduate program. Ironically, inside Universal, there was a ton of stuff in learning development programs that they were building that I was just attaching myself to as early and often as possible. Thankfully, it all said the same thing, right? You're this type of person. You enjoy these types of things. This type of stuff stimulates you. And none of that shit tracked with the job that I was performing. Yeah. It was very rote, very every quarter was the same type of stuff. And it's just your proverbial cog in a machine. It just kind of kept going. So a lot of lying awake, trying to fall asleep, trying to figure out, what is my purpose? Why am I doing these things? Blah, blah. And I this may not be a lot of people, but it's kind of part of my personality is I like to rip the Band-Aid off at a certain point in time. I'm very, I like, to think about and meander stuff through and kind of think of all the different possibilities. But at some point, bro, I'm jumping in the deep end of the pool and I'm going to figure out how to swim if I don't know already, Yeah. So I ripped that Band-Aid off and I was I can't do it. I found this lane. I literally was a part of a process that was going to lay off a quarter of our staff. And I was building it alongside the people that were going to deploy it. And so I just knew this was coming. And so I kind of raised my hand, saved a bunch of people's jobs in the process of doing so because my salary could go to kind of paying for them. And it gave me this golden parachute so that I had a little bit of time to figure out this next move, but knew I had to hit the ground running in order to be able to kind of keep food on the table. And again, I had a 1.5 and a 4-month-old at home. So it's I really had to figure some shit out in terms of making sure that the lights stayed on,
So in that process, in that transition, you say we go to bed one night, leaving a job, we wake up the next day. Okay, I'm an entrepreneur. It's time to hit the ground running. It's time to go.
Yeah.
And I'm asking this question almost in twofold, right?
Sure.
One of from your story standpoint of what you did, but also in a secondary standpoint of if someone's listening to this and is in similar shoes, what was your process that you would share with somebody? So the question is, what did you do? What were those initial steps? Is it well, man, it was as simple as I just started cold emailing or I just started making stuff and then getting into what was that like?
So I think I have a slightly different way of looking at these problems than our peers in a way. Admittedly, if I have to be totally frank and transparent, I'm paying my bills and making my living through creativity right now. Right. The process of generating leads and doing that sort of stuff, I'm home. It's 7-8 years in, I'm honing in on what that looks like. Right. And I'm creating my own process and refining it and making sure that it's something that's there. And that's, again, I think a common theme that we'll go back to is I'm so engaged because of the massive mountain that we have to climb as creatives to figure out how to have like a sustainable, successful business. So I just want to give that kind of disclaimer, is that I'm still actively figuring it out. But at the beginning, it was just heavily relying on my network. And I had, in a different sphere, but similarly, I was in a creative world that I can kind of keep going back and forth with, family and friends and saying like, hey, this is kind of what I'm doing. Right. I was also, and still to this day, I'm never above a side hustle. I think a good side hustle is, to me, I'm super adult ADD. I can give you a fucking solid 6 to 8 hours, but at that, I got to check out and do like a different thing for a little bit, dude. So I teach part-time. I usually have a class a semester. That kind of is just like my disconnect, 1 or 2 nights a week. Like I'll have this kind of thing. So teaching floated me for a little bit. We had an e-com business that floated us for a little while that my wife took the predominant lead on. And I was support role for her. And then it was just doing the work, dude. Like I said, that export ABA kind of concept was just constant reps and getting better in some way, shape, or form. And knowing that there's a process to being where I wanted to be, right? And so I went through the process of going like, okay, I remember very vividly knowing, because the video wasn't just like a total accident. I remember thinking through my master's program, if you're a small business that exists in this marketplace and you don't have a visual presence, you might as well shut your doors. Like you're invisible to people. Like you have to have some sort of photo video component to what you do, right? Because you have to communicate. Like that is the two-way communication street and channel at this point. So I had this in the back of my head. I think, what's his name? Mr. Wonderful from Shark Tank has been like barking this for the last like month or but like year and a half or so of like, I used to pay engineers like all this money. Now it's like people that can tell a story. You know what I mean? I'm like, yes, like I've been saying this.
I've seen that exact
right?
video.
It's great. And I'm happy that narrative is becoming pervasive across multiple dynamics. Right. So, but I went through knowing there's going to be a lot of different situations that are going to need my creative skill set. And so I literally would just write down a running list of, this type of business, this type of business, this type of business, people that are looking for weddings, these people that are doing corporate events, they're doing event recaps, they're doing retreats like we did, they're doing all, and I'm just kept going down like, what could you be using video for? And how could you use it to communicate? And what value would it be bringing? And so I had this understanding of like thinking through the business aspect of what creativity and business and video could add. Like what value am I going to be able to bring?
Yeah.
So then my pitching and my conversations weren't about like, I've got this camera and like, I know how to do lights and like, not that there's anything wrong if that's where you are in your face, but like who gives a shit? Like no one cares about those things. You have to solve problems for the client and add value to their world that's going to exceed the cost that you're going to ask in order to get that work done, And that's as simple as you can make business. Like I still to this day, that's exactly what I feel like and how I go through my process of like, I'm looking at what this is going to cost in order to do, plus a profit margin that I need in order to have a successful business. Of course, if I'm not getting hired as a freelance contractor. And then is that equitable or in the ratio of what's acceptable for that business for them to be able to take this thing that I've made for them and go and deploy it in the marketplace and start to do the things they need to do with it. Right. Mm-hmm. And so it just became this like endless effort of trying to kind of solve that puzzle. Like, how can I keep adding value to these different worlds? And like through my network of friends and people that had shot and people that were producing and directing and editing, blah, blah, blah. And it was just like this kind of, I kept being the dumbest person in the room and asking a ton of questions and then going back to my little hub. And I think all of it, Ross, was like just not being afraid to work and understanding that transition wasn't, my normal cadence, and it was okay to have late nights and early mornings, and it was okay to be tired, and it was okay. Like all that stuff's fine. Like it's not forever, you don't have to have that forever. And there's still ebbs and flows today. 3 weeks ago, I was up until 1 a.m. I exported 40 different videos that day. Like, do I love that? No, but sometimes in the cadence of my life now as a father with, the old dudes that are fucking running around running my life, like sometimes that's what it takes to say I get to wake up and do what I love for a living,
Right. Now, we're going to jump ahead a little bit because we're kind of already just on the subject of what it means to be a creative and how to pitch yourself and how to, doing the work and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
I am insanely curious of your opinion on the general question of like, what do you feel like it looks like to be a creative entrepreneur of any type, a creative service provider, whatever you want to call it, in like today's world? And this isn't necessarily like an AI talk. I'm talking more so just like business itself, because full transparency, something that I think you and I should casually catch up on, not on a podcast, but the past calendar year for me, up until a handful of months ago, was the single worst freelance creative year that I've ever experienced.
Same.
Way worse than year number one when we're doing these things like the please hire me, oh my gosh, where can I get a job, blah, blah, blah. Right. And, I'm sure that, yes, things like AI can play into that and things like budgets and just the way that, money is nowadays and all this sort of stuff. But there's also the talk of like oversaturation and everybody's doing everything and all this sort of stuff. So I know there's 100 different directions that we can take, but at a base level, I would love to know, like, what are your thoughts on like what it takes to be a successful freelance creative or whatever that may be in like today's world?
Right. So I love this question so much. I think about this all the time. And I talk about it quite a bit. So context of like the lens that I look at this from, I teach entrepreneurship for the indie artists at UCLA Extension. And the idea is, how would you go as a creative entrepreneur and make your first dollar? Like, what's the toolkit that you need to know? And like, what are the conversations we need to kind of start having in order to make that something that's like a reality for you, right? My short answer to what you're saying is, I don't think there's ever been a better time to be a creative in the history of human existence. And that may seem like a very bold statement to make, but if you go back to like, we are creatives, no one knew nor gave a shit about how great of a composer Beethoven was. They could care less. If he didn't get called by the court to come do something fancy for the state, that he was starving. Now, of course, we herald this individual as like one of the greatest to ever write music. He was deaf. He was all these like insane things, and just take his name out and insert whatever it is, right? The court jester with the crazy Stussy hat that we all used to draw as a kid. Like, you're just like a pawn in the kingdom of what's going on. Very little recognition in terms of the greatness until after the fact. I think a big reason for that is that there are a ton of, in air quotes, gatekeepers that get to decide what's good or not. And the internet becomes the ultimate meritocracy and gets to decide, really the people get to decide what's dope and what's not. So in this context, music, photography, poetry, film, painting, pottery, fill in the discipline, the internet gets to decide what's great or not. There's no one, there's no old fuck in the back of the club with his arms crossed, like, shaking his head, coming up with some conniving idea on how to add, breakage fees to your record contract. Like, it doesn't really exist anymore. Mm-hmm. Major label systems are like plucking up these people that have tremendous independent success. And they're just like, well, let's see if we can pour gasoline on this fire. Film's the same thing. Like, why are there so many streaming platforms? Why is YouTube such a dominant platform? Vimeo is the same. Well, what's happening is that these little smaller film festivals are getting up. People are doing the work on their own. And then if it's great and people think that it's cool, it gets upstreamed to the various places that it needs to go, With that being said, the noise now becomes the problem. And so what I lament sometimes is, even though I play in a space where marketing is predominantly the way I'm earning a living, I contribute to and play a role in the marketing process for most of the clientele that I serve. Mm-hmm. And my products are used to help them tell their story and communicate with their end consumer, right? But I hate the fact that I have to be in that marketing hamster wheel, and I have to participate in the marketing hamster. What I wish, and I think what most creatives wish, is that like the work would just be good enough and people would see it, and then I would just be able to get hired. But that's, unfortunately, that's not what it is, right?
Right.
So the fact that there is a free way to distribute our content across a multitude of platforms, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, Snapchat, those are free for us. We don't have to pay anything to do that. But that means they're free for everyone else. And so if the distribution channels become overcrowded and oversaturated, like you're talking about, well, then the game becomes, how do you niche your skill set down so that you understand a very particular marketplace that you serve? And that's not easy, nor is it comfortable for a lot of people, myself included. But the further down the road of creativity I get, the more I realize there are certain things that I just A, don't want to do, or B, am not good enough to do. It's just not the thing that I like doing. And so the niches have kind of naturally popped up for me. If I'm in music space, if I'm in health and wellness, it's hard in the totality of what product we bring. It's hard to fuck around with the value that I can bring. I can speak the business side. I can do the creative stuff. I can tell those stories with real emotion. I can move the needle on what that looks like. Are there individual skill sets that I can continue to bet? Of course. That's why I'm here. And that's what keeps me engaged. So I did this project for a supply chain management company, and they like track millions of like little pieces that, the dashboard light on your Toyota Camry and moving around. And I had to tell this story. It's like, could I hit record and put the edit together and put it? Yeah, I did it. Were they was it a good marriage of, it just didn't work out. It was actually the single worst piece of feedback I ever received, like the most aggressive and the worst piece of feedback I ever received. Like the email just read, hate it, completely missed the mark.
Okay.
And I was like, okay, like that's, it sucked. It stung. It made me better. Right. But I realized through a lot of I think, Russ, like going through this process of being like, it's all hunky dory and everything's great. Like, that's not it. Like, I really am, the obstacle is the way. And like the struggle is the way that we reveal these sorts of things. Like you have to take those L's in order to realize like, I don't want to do this anymore. Or these pain points make me put this clause in my contract, or getting taken advantage of. And the scope changing entirely is why I need to be able to recognize when I see this one sentence, like that's actually not what this means. So you have to go through the process of making that stuff happen, but you can't do that unless you're doing the reps. But the beautiful part is there's never been more of a time where people need this type of service that we, and what, again, like you said, whatever that context is, photography, blah, 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 than there is now. Because there's this endless amount of communication that has to happen. You just have to find the lane that you want to sit and play in and the value that you want to continue to offer that subsect of the marketplace.
How do you feel like you can translate your value that you have and you can offer to someone in, I will say, a generalized clientele base?
Yeah.
Often feels like they're speaking a different language. And a simpler way for me to ask that maybe is, I'll use myself as an example.
Sure.
Right. I have been transitioning a lot of what I do from, oh, that's Ross, the video director, or for the photographer, the social media guy.
Right.
Into, well, no, what I do is creative direction. I lead a lot of projects from the creative direction standpoint, and I can lead a project of any kind, any campaign. If it needs video, great. If it ends up needing photo, great. If it needs design, whatever, right?
Yeah.
I can touch all those bases. Therefore, I can ball that up under the label of creative direction, whether I execute or I build a team to execute for you.
Yeah.
Now, in that transition, right, how, so if you're talking to me or anybody in a transition like that, how does the language, because I feel like there's always a language barrier of getting people to understand when they come to me and they say, hey, we need a video, or hey, we need social media management.
Right.
That language barrier of me saying, well, actually, what I think you need is creative direction. This is how I can actually help you times 5.
Right.
Rather than just being the guy that posts for you, or just being the guy that clicks record, like you were saying, and then records the video and whatever.
Right.
How do you transcend that often weird disconnect and that language barrier? Because most of the time people get caught in this one track mindset of someone tells them they need a commercial, so they say we need a video. They don't think they need a campaign for something, right? So obviously we're using video and photo and social, stuff as the example here. But in general, I don't know if there was a clear question.
No, 100%. I know exactly what you're talking about.
For you, or just toss on your advice cap, like, how do you translate that to get people to truly understand, to then be able to be hired for something?
Yeah. So I've been going through this a lot recently, I think that there's this year as well was a very interesting one. I know Josh and I had talked quite a bit about different elements of why we thought this year was kind of interesting, but I think across the board, most of my creative network was struggling to kind of figure these things out. So it lends itself to a lot of time to try and kind of figure these types of questions out. I started to chuckle when you're talking about this because the conversation almost always starts with, we just need a fill in the blank, right?
Yep.
We just need a 15-second video, or we just need this stuff to be edited down to this thing, or we just need blah, blah, blah. And, that's just an immediate, I don't want to say a red flag, but that's something to be thinking through, right? It's either, to me, in my experience, and I don't want to sound callous when I think about this, it's one of two things. It's someone that's trying to put lipstick on the pig of how much work it's going to be in order to get this creative job done, because they very well know what the process is going to look like. And so they're trying to pad the budget so that it doesn't go in other places. This absolutely happens. Or what I find is more often the case is that it's a client that is naive in terms of what it takes in order to get that job done. And to your point, they're asking some sort of question because someone told them that they needed such a thing, right?
Often asking the wrong question, like you said.
So the way that we uncover this, if given the opportunity to, which I think is kind of the crux in this entire statement, is by trying to zoom out and ask a bunch of questions. And I start to ask the question that you initially asked was, how am I differentiating myself and adding value to these types of conversations so that people feel comfortable? Because what we're trying to do is build a sense of trust that we are the solution, or at least part of the solution for the problem that they have, right? And I think our inclination, especially mine at an earlier phase of my creative career, was to try to talk my way into being the solution and tell them all of the different stuff and people I've worked with and things that I've done, and give them the reasons and the keys to the castle in terms of why I'm the solution. It's completely opposite. It's way more about your ability to start to pick apart their statement and ask these types of questions. And I tend to start with and lean in on, who is this for? If my job is working with another business, I'm probably in some way, shape, or form helping them communicate with their either internal team or with external potential customers, right? So the question, and what I think is very easy for both sides to understand, is, who are we talking to? And what is the intent of the content that we're making? And do you have a desired result of what this content is going to solve? Like what purpose does it serve? And so if we start there, we end up getting pretty quickly down to a situation where we know, okay, it's going to be this demographic, this psychographic. We need it to serve this purpose. It's going to be distributed in these ways. It's going to be. So then I can pretty easily and factually go back to their own data set and fact pattern and go, well, I don't think this is going to be the solution to that. Or what I think is more powerful, and what I try to lean into, is, have you also thought about fill in the blank? It's not an exact science. Sometimes it doesn't work. And it's okay at this point in my creative career. It's okay that I'm not the solution for everyone. In fact, it's probably better than I'm not. Right? I heard something that initially really rubbed me the wrong way, but somebody who I've worked with quite a bit was talking to another person about like a different part of their work, I guess, a producer to help in a certain thing. So we would come in as production, but this would be producer. And this individual was like, the producer mentioned that they work with us a lot. And the client was like, oh, they're really expensive though. And at first I was like, and then I stopped myself. I'm like, yeah, good. If that's the impression that I get for people, is that we're expensive to work with, there's a good reason for that. Right. Mm-hmm. And so, again, I know we come kind of from a similar angle in the way that we view this. I know Josh and I talk about these types of things a lot. There's a point in your career where you should be the yes person. And you need to be the yes person for the reps. You need to be the yes person for the experience. You need to get the wins. More importantly, you need to get the losses. You need to understand the pain that it takes in order to be successful. Because if you don't have that sticking point, it's fleeting and you don't appreciate what it actually means to be successful in a creative career. It's a grind, it's a privilege, but if you can figure out how to do it, it's so rewarding. And I'm not like, I want everyone to experience that, but I don't want it to just be something that's like this instant gratification for people, because the value of what we do and the space that we occupy in the societal roles is such a perfectly positioned place to be, right? Mm-hmm. We're not lawyers. We're not doctors. We're not accountants. We're not dentists. We make sense of the world around us by the way that we see the world through our eyeballs. And we give people permission to understand what it is that they're looking at. And so you have to earn that right through reps. So to me, that's number one. And then you slowly get to a place where you start to understand who the fuck you are and what value you're offering if you're paying attention and you're doing it long enough, right? And again, you can start to see in the different phases, we're weeding out the people like, it would be fun to make a living with the camera. Fuck yeah, it would. It totally would be. But then you got to get to your like 3, 4, 5. And it's not always so fun. And you start getting to a place where those budgets aren't good enough. And so you have to start to make the case that you're worth more. How do you do that? It's end-to-end elevating the experience. Mm-hmm. What does your discovery look like? What types of questions are you asking? Are you getting more and giving more value just in that discovery call than just answering the questions that they asked, right? What does your proposal look like? Are you able to showcase at that time? That's the time to showcase, this is what we've done and this is how we've done it. But does that proposal make people think like, holy shit, like look at the time and the care and the presentation and just the numbers that they sent across. Now I'm starting to feel like this is something that's worth my time, that this could be expensive, but the value you're getting in terms of that is higher, right? And then, of course, the way we show up on set and the type of way that we make people feel and the energy that we have when we're moving around. And, of course, when problems come up, do we make people panic and feel like it's all these small little soft skills of remaining calm and offering solutions and telling people this is what we got. You're picking off, playing whack-a-mole, but with the nice little fluffy pads with the feathers and all this stuff so people feel good about it. Staying in communication in the post process for us, and then coming back with our delivery templates are just as dope as the proposals, right? So this is Josh and I had these conversations. Mark and I had these conversations all the time. Like, it's how do we continue to end-to-end elevate ideation through distribution and thinking through the process of what problems arise throughout your entire life cycle of a product that you're creating. It's tough, dude. It's not something that's easy. Admittedly, I'm sitting here talking my shit like I know exactly how to do it perfectly. I'm pretty close. But there's so much, it's still Swiss cheese, right? We're still trying to plug the holes, you know what I mean?
Of course.
But to me, it's more, the better I get at it, Ross, the more I'm asking questions. And more importantly, the more I'm recognizing the trouble that these statements are going to cause me in the long run. And trying to like really before I even open and put my folder structure together, hey, you said this, but I got to be clear about this, right? We just had somebody, this project now was 35 hours of editing. And initially the email sentence read, editor has ultimate creative control. That was a lie. Mm-hmm. It's not their fault. It's my fault. I should have been like, of course it's not going to be that.
Right. What does that really mean?
Yeah.
Is the question, right? Yeah.
And the response should be something like, I see that you said this. To us, that means whatever we put back, there will be no notes. And you'll accept it wholeheartedly. Is that what you mean by that? No, of course not. Right? So a lot of words to what I think is a very poignant question is, how are we differentiating ourselves? How are we showcasing the value that we have? Which I have another tactic that I'll tell you in 1 second. And then how are we, to me, it's about elevating end-to-end experience. And again, it's this common thing of like, how are you standing out across the noise? Like you have to, but the great news is like, there's work for people to do. You just have to be somebody that's honing in on what problems you solve. Right.
Yeah.
So
I want to dig back into the export every day mentality.
Yeah.
because I feel like that is very similar. It's the way you explained it earlier. I feel like it is the exact same thing as a motto that I made for myself years ago, called "Chase It Daily."
Okay.
And
I love
used to hashtag that on everything on my old profile, and used to use it everywhere. And now
Yeah.
I'm still using it to this day. But
Right.
that idea being, just like you said, of like, hey, make daily deposits,
Right.
work towards your goals in either big or small ways. It does not matter, even in the tiniest way.
Yeah.
It still counts. Do something to propel yourself forward a little bit every single day. Dig into a little bit of that, like, export everyday mentality for you. Like, I
Yep.
mean, you were exporting every day,
Oh,
right?
almost still.
Yeah.
There's
Okay.
times on the weekend where, I mentioned I'm married, I have 2 boys. My boys are, it's so corny to say this, but they're multi-sport athletes, and they play a bunch of different stuff. So just this last weekend alone, we had 7 games across 2 days that we were there.
Wow.
So
Okay.
working throughout the weekend, and this is why I say, like, I'm privileged to make my passions my career. I don't, not from a client standpoint, but I don't mind fucking around in the edit or shooting something or doing something on the weekend, because it brings me joy. Like, I really enjoy doing it. Right.
Mm-hmm.
But even to this day, like, this is 8 some odd years into me having this notion, like, export every day is still a thing that I try to do as often as I can. So it just takes different forms now, I told this story on Ryan Corl's podcast too. It's I don't know. I can't, still to this day, I can't get over. So Netflix has this show called Abstract. I think it's 2 seasons, and each episode follows a different discipline, but a world-class creative in that discipline. Interior design, chefs, illustrators, set designers. Like, it's just phenomenal. And of course, it says, I mean, this is like when the Netflix documentary was like a thing to have, right?
Yeah.
So season 1, episode 1 is this guy, Christoph Niemann. He has many claims to fame. One that's easily tangible is that he's had more covers on the New Yorker magazine than any other illustrator in the history of the magazine. He was educated by the guy that drew Yellow Submarine cover in Berlin. And so just like this rigorous educational process. And it's one of those things where, like, I just picked up a camera. You know what I mean? It's like, I'm kind of like the equivalent to a Pet Boys auto detailer in that regard. And I kind of vowed to myself that I would not go to film school. Like, I would just learn the disciplines as I needed to learn them.
Yeah.
This is also at the point that I had a master's and undergraduate degree. And I was like, I don't really know if I want to go back to school.
Right.
But I have envy for people that, Pasadena Art College is right down the street from my house. Christo went there. Like, all these like sensational artists have gone there. And so you hear these stories of people that like went to art school, and he just, he gets drilled and berated because he can't, like, his line isn't perfect. So he's got an office in Berlin. He's got an office in Manhattan. And the episode is stunningly beautiful because it distills down what he believes his life's work is, which is of course they like zoom in on a clock ticking. And he says, from 9 to 6, my job is to have pencil to paper. And I know that 99% of the shit that I'm going to see is going to end up in the trash. And they're doing their whole crumple the paper up and throwing it in the thing. But I can't get to the 1% of career defining greatness if I'm not going through 99% of the bullshit that ends up in the trash. Like, I'm just the vessel for the creative process to come through. And it was such a profound epiphany for me, especially, just when the student's ready, the teacher will appear sort of thing. And I was like, oh, that's it. Like, to me, I'm trading film school for the reps and just digging into making sure that some element of my process is improving day over day. And this resonates with me as a human being anyway, right? It's this idea of 1% better every day. And like you said, daily deposits. That's just the way that I live my life. Like, even today, I got a bullshit workout in 20 minutes right before we started this call, because I had 2 days go by where I didn't do anything. I was still running around. My Whoop said I was at 19 and a half day strain with my kids. But it was a thing where I knew I don't want to fall in the cadence of pushing it off one more day. Right.
Yeah.
So it's just, I'm always in this mode. And right now, I know we were talking before this call. It's like, this time in particular for me has been really difficult. We've been going through a whole bunch of family health issues, which thankfully are on the up and up. I've physically feeling and mentally, emotionally feeling, depressed, not to the point where I can't do anything, but I really have to push myself to get through that. And this idea of export every day, this spirit of that idea. And what was yours? I lost it.
Chase it daily.
Okay, so dude. I think to me, this chase it daily means more to me now than export every day does. I think it's more encapsulating what I'm talking about. But that's what it is. It's the feeling of pushing through this temporary emotional and physical state to get through to the other side of where my goals and the discipline that's allowing me to get to those things are, right? And so we talked about Pressfield's War of Art, and he just personifies the idea of resistance, right? The voice of resistance, always telling you to be status quo and find homeostasis, and it's okay, and you don't have to do that. And no, it's not. And just this morning, I'm like, I sometimes we edit ourselves into a hole, and I'm trying to problem solve myself out of this thing. And there was all the reasons why I had to go to the bathroom, or I had to check Instagram one more time, or I needed an extra cup of coffee, and I can recognize it quickly now to be like, no, this is your creative loser telling you that it's okay to not take, when success is just on the other side of that hill, right? Yeah. So export every day became this almost personified energetic force for me in every aspect of my life, and especially my creative career. And so the more comfortable I got with this fear of failure and the understanding that I may not make it or whatever it is, export every day got me over the other side of that wall. And you just start to kind of recognize these things and this kind of sense, I hate to say it, but it's like the sense of creative maturity, I guess.
Yeah. No, I think that makes sense.
You know what I mean? But the driver of it was you got to put in the reps. The work happens in the quiet, dark confines of this office.
For me, can I jump in real quick?
Please, yeah.
Because something you just said spawned this of for me, for years, the Chase It Daily idea was almost a cool excuse to be a workaholic.
Right.
It was the kind of the grind culture, right?
Yeah,
it was years ago where that was the big thing, and so it almost spawned out of that, right? Of and not in a bad way. It was just that was how I kept myself motivated to be I want to be a freelancer or entrepreneur for my career. I want to work for myself. So I got to chase after these things daily.
Totally.
But now, something else that you've mentioned in this entire conversation is joy. And now I almost feel like that's the chase now, because that's the counterbalance to the reps, to the work that sometimes can turn into burnout, that sometimes can turn into that oh my God, I'm doing too much. I don't want to chase it anymore. Right. There was literally probably at this time, maybe 2 years ago, where I actually literally kind of hated the motto. Yeah. I was like, why did I ever say that? That's so stupid. I don't want to chase things every day. It's so But then I understood what new form that it took. Right. Yeah. And chase can be, a very loose term there, but it's to do the work, but also understanding that the work and doing the work comes with the counterbalance of what am I doing to bring myself joy? Yeah. And I would love to hear in your just entire timeline, whether it's recently, whether it's forever ago, in that mentality of export every day, chase it daily, whatever it may be, and just doing the work to become an entrepreneur, to become self-employed, to remain becoming is one thing, remaining is a whole other, right?
Very fair. Yeah.
What has that balance been like for you? Would you say that implementation of making sure you're focusing on things to bring yourself joy is keeping your figurative cup filled? What does that look like for you? Have you hit those moments of burnout where you're like, man,
100%.
What a mistake I've made. And then, oh, wait, what if I made sure I was doing things to make myself happy? That's going to keep some more fuel so I can keep getting the reps.
Yeah. So, okay. There's never been a mistake moment that I can recall. Painful moments, yes. But I also have to qualify that, Ross, by saying I don't believe in mistakes. I think everything happens for a reason. And so even horribly difficult things, there's always a reason for them. Regrettable, maybe, but mistakes, no. So never had a mistake that I can, or that this was a mistake that I can think of. I'm in a place right now where if I'm not careful, burnout is we're millimeters away from that. Right. Yeah. And I'm not, I'm 41. And even though in my mind, I feel like I'm still 12, I am seasoned enough at this point that I've earned all of these gray hairs, and I know that it's acceptable for me to just openly talk about that. I don't have a problem with that conversation. Quite the contrary. I actually think that it's to our benefits to have those dialogues early and often, right? Because I'm not alone, and thankfully I've been through enough shit in life to understand that like there's someone else out there that's doing that. I also was raised in a 12-step household, so like taking that focus off of me and talking to other people is like one of the tenets of doing so. But yeah, I think there's a lot of ways I can go about answering that question. One of the ones I think is probably for me the continually more profound one is I mentioned my mom's heritage is Italian. I kind of recognize myself as being a paisan all the time, even though my last name is my mutt dad. She would tell me, the sun rose and set in my grandmother's eyes. And she would tell me all the time, you have to snatch your happiness in short bursts. And it sounded cool at the time. I fully understand that now. And to complement that story, I'm a big Neil deGrasse Tyson fan. And he was doing an interview with Tim Ferriss. And, you talk about two highly driven individuals that say yes to a lot of things, right? And Tim posed the question in some way, shape, or form of like, how do you respond to people saying you're doing too much? And how do you manage a very busy schedule? And he gave a physiological answer to this, which threw me for a loop. deGrasse Tyson did. And he goes, is your heart rate static throughout the day? And Tim replied, of course, no, it's not. It would actually be alarming if it was. He goes, exactly. And he goes, and so I have accepted and lean into the fact that throughout my life, I'm going to have periods of an elevated heart rate, and I'm going to have periods where I'm cool and I'm at rest. And I just know that that's going to be the normal cadence throughout the day, week, month, year, lifetime. And I've accepted that and I'm okay with that. And it was such a New York way of answering that question. And like, I feel like I was a New Yorker in a past life. So it matches that cadence for me. And so along a very busy, full schedule, and, anyone that kind of partners with me across a long period of time, my buddy Jason, I'm Jason Anthony is his handle on Instagram. He's a very, very dear friend and somebody that I do, most of my creative work with. And Jason will attest, like, I hope he's accepted. I think he gets this idea that like, he just knows that my schedule is crazy and chaotic, but he trusts that I'll get the work done at the quality that I need to get it done with. And so through managing my deadlines and knowing that I have to have my own kind of deadlines, we've taught, like, I have my little schedule. I've got I know exactly how to kind of move around. My priority is always husband, father, creative, in that order. And so I have to make sure that I'm an available and present and loving, compassionate father and husband. And I have to make sure that I'm available to fill my cup with the work that I get to do. And so being a creative, the privilege of being a creative to me is filling the cup. That is who I am. That's why I'm here. There is no way of looking at this thing. I'm not here to, reconcile the accounts to the penny that's missing like I was at Universal. That's not, to me, that's valuable work for someone else. I'm here to make shit. And I'm here to have the things that I make solve problems for people. And I get a tremendous amount of joy in doing that. And I recognize that, and I try to stay in that state of gratitude as much as possible, and understanding that this is a privilege that I get to do what I get to do, and that I've been able to do it for as long as I can, right? There are days where it's like, I got to really push through, and I got a schedule that I put down that I committed to making, and that's what keeps me moving. I have deadlines that my clients are expecting me from. I have an example that I have to be for the two little eyes that are looking at their dad, trying to figure out what it means to be a young man and understand what integrity and responsibility mean. I had a beautiful example of that in my own father. I remember I was driving to work. We had rehearsal for, I think we were like 2 a.m. or our show that we were doing was 2 a.m. I crack at dawn. I'm back up again, driving on a phone call with my dad. He goes, "How you doing?" I go, "I'm okay." My dad had a lot of really nice cars, and I go, I'm just tired. Like, I really wish I could just kind of sit at home and not do anything today. And he goes, "I know, but people don't buy Ferraris because they're tired and they want to sit at home all day. So keep putting your foot on the gas. You're going to be okay." And that, like, pun and metaphor is really it. You know what I mean?
Right.
And I'm, of course, Ross, like, I don't mean to like trivialize this, because I know there are people that are like really working through some like very difficult shit, and they may not have that same perspective as I have. And it may be a real thing for them. So to be trite and trivial and be like, I'm just really joyful, dude, it's hard. I'm not trying to profess any of those sorts of things, but I'm having this understanding, and I have one other really good one that's been tremendously valuable for me, and I'll tell you in 1 second. It's just having this understanding that like, I asked for this. This is the thing that I wanted to do, and it's really happening, you know? And I can't kick a gift horse in the mouth just because shit gets difficult. Like, that's part of life. Like, life's not easy. It's for people that really want to put in the work to get that value out of it, you know?
Yeah.
So can I give you one more that's like probably the best one recently?
Yeah.
Did we talk about Phil Stutz and the Jonah Hill documentary?
I think we did.
Okay.
I feel like we did. Yeah.
So for those that don't know what Ross and my private conversations were like,
you missed them.
You missed them, right? We were talking about this documentary called Stutz that Jonah Hill made about his therapist. Now, Phil Stutz is like this revolutionary guy that does shadow work, and he calls it Part X. And so what I was seeking at the time was what I said was this ability to dance with my shadow. I need the dark, quiet, broken parts of my past to be able to do the job that I do well, because that's where a lot of my emotions and my compassion comes from, my empathy, my experience in life is from like really shitty, tragic stuff, which everybody who's living has had their version of that. But I don't need that to drive my mental subconscious all the time. And I, especially in a creative career where that like delicate balance is there, where our self-worth really impacts our ability to do a job well. And then more importantly, to interface with clients so that they don't think that we're fucking nuts and they want to hire us again. Right. So I was trying to figure out this way of what, like, you know, I would say like, my dog sometimes she just needs to go in the crate. And sometimes my loud, you're not good enough, you're a piece of shit voice needs to go in the crate too, so I can get back to work. And so I started seeing one of the people that Phil Stutz has trained.
Cool.
Yeah, it was rad, dude. And so one of the things that we worked on, one of the first things that we worked on is, she goes, where is that voice coming from? And who are you relative to that voice? Like, where are you in your life when this happened? And I said, I'm probably 3 or 4 years old, and I'm hiding in the coat closet of my house because my parents are arguing because of a whole crazy 12-step situation, that AA and NA type of stuff. So she goes, great. Open the closet and get down on that, on his level. And what does he need right now? And so now I'm like, my world's getting rocked by this, right? And I know we're going deep in the rabbit hole, but I think this will be really valuable for you and for everyone too. So what does he need right now? I go, he just needs someone to be there with him. And what does he want? He just wants to play. He wants to be 3, and he wants to be somebody that can just unadulterated and unfiltered to be that person. She goes, so be that person for him. And I go, okay. And the realization was that oftentimes we go to those things and we try to put them away. We try to get them out of our life, when all they want to do is just be acknowledged and brought into the limelight with us and stand beside us. And so about 1.5 years ago is when this conversation was taking place. It literally, Ross, actually it was weeks after because I wrote my initial onboarding with her in the hotels in Charlotte.
Oh, wild. Okay.
I just put the timeline together.
That's awesome.
Yeah, like we literally would go home from dinner and I would like write this whole thing out. So my first sessions were like days after that. So she goes, I'm giving you permission to name him and to bring him into your day-to-day life as often and early as possible. And so I have this odd practice of talking to myself as a 3-year-old kid and constantly reminding that person. I mean, this, if you want to talk about woo-woo shit, we can't get much more woo-woo in this. We break out the chakra crystals and maybe the Palo Santo or whatever it's called, and then we can do it. But I talk to my younger self all the time. And it's usually, I do my morning meditations, I journal, I say my gratitudes and all this different stuff. And a lot of the time, if I'm feeling like I'm feeling now, I'll talk to him and I'll remind this 3-year-old version of me of all of the shit that I've done, like what I'm going to do today, and the fact that I get to call this my career, and the fact that I've accomplished some great stuff in terms of my degrees, and I get to serve people as an educator. I get to be a father. I get to be a loving husband. I get to be a community member and be a coach on my kids. I get to do all this shit. And that 3-year-old dude would be really fucking proud of the 41-year-old man that he's become. And it's hard and it's really vulnerable. And I'm like, the fact that I'm telling you this right now is like crazy to me. But like, I feel like people need to know that that's a thing. And that's been something that's moved mountains in my life, to be able to bring that version of me into my day-to-day life. And so when I talk about snatching happiness in short bursts, it's like letting dude know, like, hey man, like you're teaching your kids the joy of snowboarding right now. Like, who gives a fuck if you have to get down on your knees one more time? Like, these dudes are shredding the top of Mammoth at 9 and 8 years old. Like, how fucking rad is it that you get to do? So my happiness comes in short bursts like that, you know?
Dude, I love that so much. Thank you so much for sharing all of that.
Dude, thanks for allowing me to do it, man. I appreciate the lane.
Man, I got a couple last things for you, because I know we got to wrap up. I know you got to go.
We're getting there.
Last couple questions are going to be a little bit formal questions, and we'll get this thing wrapped up. Okay. Yeah. So right now, I'd be very curious to know if you had the ability. We're going to use our imaginations here. Okay. Right? I think we're both creatives, right?
We're pretty good with that.
If you got the opportunity to prescribe everybody, everywhere, one thing for 30 days, what thing would you choose? One thing for 30 days? 30 days. You know, we've talked a lot about, chasing it daily, export every day, all that sort of stuff. So now we get a micro example, right? Obviously hypothetical here, but we get to prescribe something to everybody. What would we want them to do? To me, it would be movement. I know we share a fondness for difficult exercise, but it doesn't have to be that. To me, it's just whatever the thing that you normally do, just do one step more than what you typically do. So if I'm on the couch and I don't really do much, just get out 20 minutes a day and go walk. Try to hit 7,500 steps in a day. If you're already moving around a little bit, like, okay, let's try to up the weight a little bit. Let's try and do things. Let's probably run a mile. Let's try the physiological response that I have, the shift in state of being when I actually move my body, is one of the most profound things. There is no medication or there's nothing better. Yep.
Yep. And I think you and I could probably have another 5-hour conversation about the physiological states that we can get in those things. Just the shit that we don't even realize, let alone the place that our mind goes when we get to, get the demons out.
Yep.
But that's it, man. Because then the subsequent of that is the discipline you get into actually committing to doing that thing. And it's a thing there's nothing bad that's coming out of that. It's all positive direction. And so you have that momentum, and that begets more momentum. It's movement. That's it.
I love it. Now, sometimes on this show, I've often asked the question, it's stolen from another podcast, mind you. But I've often asked the question is like, hey, if you could time travel back to younger you and share something, what moment would you go to? And not to like butterfly affect your future, but just to share something. Now, it's interesting that you have actually shared that is an active practice of yours. So I want to change it up to a different version of this question.
Sure.
If future Robert now, right? Let's say 67, whatever you want to have it, right? He shows up to you now and gets to share something with you.
Fuck.
What do you hope that he's sharing with you?
That it was all worth it. Number one, that it was all worth it. And number two, you're not eating dog food. You've got enough money that you're still doing okay.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Literally perfect.
Yeah.
I have one final question for you, man.
Yes, my man.
And then we will wrap this thing up and call it a podcast.
Cool.
So I end every episode with the exact same question. So now it's your turn. So right now, I want you to pretend like everybody in the world is listening to this, right? Yes. We talked about prescribing people something for 30 days. Let's say they're still listening, right? Throw logic out the window. Everybody can hear you. They can understand you. And you get this one final moment right now with a live mic attached to everybody to share one thing What is it that you're telling everybody in this moment, and what would you really want them to hear more than anything?
So that means that myself is included in this. I think that patience is grossly underestimated and underappreciated. And that combined with the ability to really, it's funny that we're actually bookending our conversation because I brought up in our pre-interview Wayne's World. But this literally is what's coming to my mind right now, not to be, proverbial about it. Patience and living in the now. It's astonishing to me. And now we have the data and the physiological responses to understand how and why this happens. It's astonishing to me how much we miss in the present, myself included, because we're fixated on some other version of ourselves. And so living in the now, I keep mentioning this thing, like AA was a huge part of my childhood, not because I was fucking drunk all the time, but because I was trying to figure out how to deal with these parents that I had. And one of my favorite things, one, because it made me laugh at 12 years old, but then I started to really understand what it is if you live with a foot in tomorrow and a foot in yesterday, you shit all over today. And I was like, dude, leave it to the drunks to come up to like something that profound and crude at the same time.
I've never heard that before.
Wild, right? Huh. So that's it. It's patience. It's living in the now. Most of the stuff we think about is never even going to come to fruition. It's actually just a completely beautiful part of our prefrontal neocortex. Like that's what it's designed to do, is run all these simulations so that we don't have to run out into the street to figure out if it's the right move or not. But it allows us to be crazy, neurotic, and anxious. And I think creatives in general tend to be so much more emotional in our responses to things. And so we can fall into that trap. Live in the now, be grounded. One of my favorite exercises to like literally, feel my feet in the chair, feel my hands in, like just those states of being. I think a lot of good comes from the fact that like, this is the only thing that matters right now. Make sure that you're present to see what it is. And even if it's a shit situation, there's a lot to be learned from it. And then I'd probably give people a hug. I like giving people hugs a lot. That's what I would do.
I love it. Dude, virtual hug right now, because this was an absolute blast of a this flew by.
Yeah.
I feel like we've been talking for 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like it's only been 15 minutes. And I know we could absolutely, we could make this 6 hours for sure. But what this shows me is we just need to make it a little bit more of an intention to catch up every couple months. Like officially, we need to make that happen. We need to hop on here and just chat and catch up, because the amount of stuff that I know we just didn't even dig into and all this, like there's so much that I still want to catch up with you on. So let's make that happen, not in a podcast form. We need to do that.
I like this, but then I got to get the opportunity to ask you questions too, because you are great at asking questions on my side. But I want to know. So we got to do it that way.
I'm always open. We will make that happen. We will make that a reality. But man, we made this reality. We made this a podcast.
I love it, dude.
That is officially a wrap. Before we say goodbye, do you want people to go check you out anywhere? Where can they find your work if you want to go seek it out?
Yeah, I'm around. RMT Shoots, like Robert Mary Thomas Shoots, like Bang Bang on all the platforms. Robert Teegarden on YouTube. CYOPP, yeah, you know me, .video is the website for Create Your Own Path Productions. And come say hi. I'm like always chit-chatting in the DMs, and I love communicating with other creatives. And I think community from a creative standpoint is like, it's just an invaluable resource. So come say hi. I love talking.
Dude, this was a blast, man. Thank you.
Man.
Thank you so freaking much for spending some time with me this evening.
I love
seriously
it,
appreciate it.
You are excellent at doing this, by the way.
Thank you.
Giving your flowers. It was a pleasure, and just very poignant questions. You create a very, very calm, cool, safe environment. So
thank you, dude.
Thank you.
I appreciate it, man. Well, that's a podcast, dude. We officially did it.